Hey, I'm Jonathan, and this is how I became a fiber optics system integrator.
Welcome back to the Story Points podcast. I'm your host, Joe. Today we're starting a new series called How I Became. In the next couple episodes, we're going to have various guests on the show. We're going to talk through their career paths, how they became what they are, where they're going. And today we have our first guest, Jonathan, who you might remember from episode 8 and episode 10. So, Jonathan.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? Glad to be back.
Yeah, glad
Thanks
to
for
have
having
you.
me. Yeah.
This is first episode, you know.
I'm honored. I'm honored. Cheers, man. Happy to be here with you.
Cheers. Throw it down.
Yeah. Throw it down.
Blow it up.
Blow it up.
So let's
Yeah.
let's
What do you
jump
got?
right in.
What do I got?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's why we're here. So, what's your kind of title? What do you do?
That's a great question, Joe. Here's where I forget everything else. I'm a fiber optics system integrator. And essentially,
it's quite the title, by the way.
Yeah, essentially, I install systems for broadcast that mainly use fiber optics. I mean, it involves a lot more than just fiber. There's a lot of the Ethernet, cat cable, video, audio, wiring. But my specialty is in fiber. It's become fiber in the last couple of years.
So when you say broadcasts,
yeah,
what kind of broadcasts are we talking
Oh,
about?
yeah. So I work for NBC. So it's broadcasting, they're big. They do news,
TV
shows, TV, stuff you see on TV. I mean, now they've been doing for a few years now, their streaming service. But it's in that respect because fiber, as maybe our audience, I'm sure you've heard, like there's Verizon Fios and they use the same.
The original fiber.
The original fiber. They use this pretty much the same stuff. I mean, it's a whole industry. So, but they're the way they use it is different because they're just trying to bring internet to your home.
Gotcha.
We're using it to facilitate different needs throughout the building.
I know you've told me this in the past. Like, you're building studios, you're building all kinds of things for NBC, right? Like, how does all of that work? How does it come to be, I guess, is the question.
I mean, that's kind of a big package to unfold, for sure.
Oh, you don't have to go into too many industry details.
I guess to break it down small is that there's different groups within the field. So we work in the bracket of operations there, and I work out of the integration shop. And integration is just basically installing the physical systems, the equipment, the wiring. So people will design it. There's a team of engineers that create it. And above them, there's like the managers, the leadership. They're like, oh, well, we need this, or we want to make this project. We want the studio built at this time. Like, how do we do that? The engineers get involved and they find a way to tie it into the infrastructure that's already there, or they'll build new infrastructure and then they'll hand us like basically the blueprints for it. And we'll create it.
Honestly, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, and then it's a lot of stuff. Like you said, we've done studios, just equipment rooms. Like if you picture data centers, it's like we kind of have a similar setup, but it's not as like, data centers, just like server after server, like storage devices. Like it's kind of the same things repeating. Like we have a lot of equipment that will process like video and audio and stuff like that. And you can send signals through different control rooms, all different types of communications equipment really is what it is. So it's kind of a mixture of everything.
And you're just wiring all that
wiring it up all day.
Looking at this diagram, you're like, all right, this Ethernet cable goes from this switch to this
so we'll get like we'll get like a wire list is what they call it from the engineers, or a cable schedule, and it'll just be like a giant Excel sheet of like 2 locations and the types of cable that they need built, and you'll have to take that, go to the field, like look at it in person, you get a length, you'll build it depending on the type of cable.
Oh, wow. So it goes into pretty detailed.
Yeah, definitely. And then,
by the way, an Excel sheet? What?
Yeah, it's like an Excel program.
Okay.
That they make this thing in. I think it's like a document that they've had for years. They just kind of use the same format and put their own information in it.
Gotcha.
But
I'm just thinking like, for me, an Excel sheet to like do something like that just seems so janky. Not to bash on it or anything like that.
I'll have to show you one sometime so you can see like the whole layout. Like I mean, it looks nice. Like they have a whole header and everything, and it gives you all the information that you need as like the technician to go
Gotcha.
create it basically. And then we'll also get what they call elevations, which are essentially the diagrams of the rack layout. So it's like you know exactly where in a rack exactly where a piece of equipment will go. Like it'll show you the exact space that it should fit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So engineers are designing all this stuff, and you're just
They design it, and we just make it happen. They'll like order a lot of the stuff, the equipment. Like we'll receive the shipments, unbox everything, basically build it. And when we do a lot of stuff from the ground up, like if they're doing a brand new equipment room, we'll install the racks in the room, like really everything.
Oh, yeah. So
everything
like
except for construction. So once construction comes in and builds the room, and they put in the computer flooring, we pretty much take it from there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. So how does one get into the field of fiber optic? What was it? Integrated technician?
System integration.
There you go.
Yeah. So system integration is pretty much everywhere. Every building, every company, for the most part, they don't have their own system integration team. They'll usually like hire an outside contractor to do this work for them.
Okay.
Because you figure any office, you have your cat wiring, your switches.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking my office, right? We have like a rack with a bunch of switches.
There's always a server room. There's the cable comes into the building somewhere.
And then everybody's desk kind of has the
everyone's
drops.
desk has the drops. Yeah. So a lot of places will hire contractors, and they'll come in and they'll do the work for you. This specific building and at NBC, they just change things so frequently, and they have such a big building that they've like for years they've had their own team of integrators.
Right.
That they've just like it's just become part of the way they do things. Like there's always someone on staff. They don't have to worry about contractors, and like we do actually sometimes have contractors come in and they'll do like
really
because sometimes we have too much work. And like we actually can't do it all because there's not enough of us. So they'll bring another company in, and they've done it before. And they brought a company in. I'm not going to say any names, but they really messed up one of the equipment rooms to the point where they were like, "All right, you guys are done, and we're taking over from here." Like they put in like the basic infrastructure, which to this day I don't know what anything even does that they did, because their labels are all like, every cable gets labeled. So if you have to go back.
It's funny that you say that, because I feel like in our earlier episodes, we had a segment where we talked about how like contractors never do things the way you want them to be done. And this is like just expanding out into other industries where it's like, hey, bring in these contractors, and they kind of just like did a bunch of stuff, and then they got the hell out of there.
They're out, and it's like, and I can only imagine like how much they were paid for that contract. Like to build a whole equipment room. Like that was probably a pretty hefty bill.
Yeah.
And then they like really fumbled, and it was like, well, we have to now pick up the pieces of what they built and add into it,
just create
make it our own
work for you.
Yeah. So
sounds so familiar.
It was one of those things that they should have let us have from the beginning, but this was going back years ago, but it was like at that time we had a bunch of other projects. They were like, all right, let's try them, bring them in. They've done like little stuff here and there on other floors of the building. And so like, it's not like they always do a bad job. Like I've met some of the people that work for the company, like they're good. It's just like that specific job. I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you actually get into it though?
Yeah. So that's a good story. I initially had nothing to do with this field when I started. I was working for the Apple store and going to college it was like part-time job. And my father works as an engineer in this building. He's been doing it for over 30 years now.
Oh, wow.
So this was the summer of 2013. And they just needed, like, that shop literally just needed people to do pretty much manual labor.
Just need bodies.
Basically
bodies.
Basically, they just needed bodies. Like they were trying to take.
Hey, can you walk this cable from one side of the room to the other?
Kind of, yeah. They were taking on like 2 different studio builds. They were doing different equipment rooms, like upgrading a lot of the infrastructure. They needed people to do just menial tasks. So my dad was like, "Hey, if you're interested, you can come kind of like an internship. They're just looking for people for the summer to come and work in the integration shop."
Nice. Okay.
And I didn't know much about it. Like I used to go. I've been in the building a few times. He'd show me what he did, and and to kind of walk around and see the place, but I didn't really have like a concrete idea of anything going on there.
Yep.
Um, so I started that summer, and I was actually still doing Apple. Like my deal with them was I had to come in. I think it was like 1 or 2 weekends a month.
With Apple or
Yeah,
NBC?
to keep the job, because I told them I was coming back. Like it was the summer, I was still doing school. So they were like, you can keep your job here and come back, because I told them it was basically an internship, which it pretty much was at that time.
Works out pretty good.
So I basically left. I started working with them, and for the first like month and a half, I was just unboxing stuff. Like I remember I was working in this one equipment room that, like, now I know it like the back of my hand, but it's so big. It's like almost the entire floor of that building.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, it's huge. It was like one of their main
Just
rooms.
filled with boxes of servers.
Well, not the whole
switches.
room wasn't full of boxes. This one part I was working in, it was like basically a row of racks, and it was totally packed. Like, just there's these things called jack fields, and
Okay.
it's just a piece of equipment that it doesn't have any electricity or anything in it, but you can basically hook a video cable up to it, and then you can patch into it. So like if you ever see like those rooms, you just like patch cords from here to there. Like, so say you want to move a signal, like it connects to a jack field from like, oh, this studio. All right, let's bring it to this control room.
Gotcha.
Like they can cross patch it.
I'm thinking of like these old like telephone
It's
rooms.
kind of like that, but this
is
is with video signal.
Okay.
And then it's also a way where you can set them up like it has like kind of like an input output. So it's like one cable will come in here, and then you can also have another output on the same. I don't know if it's like circuit or what it would actually be called, but but you can basically like use it as a point to connect something else to, and then you can also patch into it. So these they would go through like thousands of these. Like they'd install so many all over, so they just ordered a huge shipment, and they're like, it's in the way, it's fire hazard. We just need someone to unbox it. And like it literally took me like a month. Like I was taking them, unboxing them, and like
this is why he carries a knife around.
Yeah, the box is like it's like probably like this big, like this wide. So it's like I'd have to like load a few on a cart, and like someone would have to let me out to the garbage, bring me back into the room. I didn't have access to the room at that time, so like I started doing very like menial stuff.
Yeah, but that's like first internship. Like, that's
exactly.
What you expect,
and I was totally fine doing it, because I'm like, this is so much better than like working in retail. Like, just like I didn't have to deal with like customers all day. It was like I just do my job. No one leaves me alone. Union job too, so it's like I get like not like breaks and everything. So I was like, this is great. Like just do my thing, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much how I got started, and then after doing that for a while, like I would get put on different cable poles where like, okay, we got to like run this cable from, location A to B. Just like you start learning the basics. That's why like actually the episode you guys just did about mentorship, like a lot of that kind of resonated with me, because I've worked with a lot of people that have become like mentors, even if like you just work with them maybe for a month, like you pulled something from their knowledge base, or something that they taught you.
Especially like with the union, right? A lot of those guys have been around.
For a
30
long time.
years. Like you said, your dad was there.
He was there for a while, and then I mean I'll get into this more too as we go, but like the mentor that I personally met that kind of taught me a lot of the fiber work. But before we get there, so I was just kind of doing these just menial jobs, and then the main big job we had was building the current Fallon studio.
Okay.
So I was part of the crew that did that build, and that's where I kind of learned a lot more about like handling wires and like how to coil cable properly and stuff like that. So like just being a competent worker, and like at that time they hired a lot of people who were just like
to work
didn't
on
know
that
anything.
Studio, or just
yes, on the studio, but also other jobs. But they just like I said, they needed labor. Like they needed people to just pull cable. Like you do the same cable run like all day.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to run like hundreds of audio cables from like one side to the other side. It was like you rinse and repeat, So it was like it was a lot. Like it's grueling work, but they wanted like younger guys, like people that didn't care. not didn't care, but
No,
like
but it makes
newer, like
sense.
they could learn
You know,
something. So
you're
I
there, you're
yeah.
around, people who know what they're doing, so you kind
Yeah,
of pick
so
up
they
on
would
it.
have like the senior guys kind of running the crew, and then there'd kind of be like moderately senior guys that like also knew what they were doing, but then there was a bunch of us like the greenhorns, like, and there was a few other younger guys that started with me, like we were all in our 20s, like, and that younger age group were like we're really new to the thing, the whole field.
So now, like, would you consider yourself one of those guys who's like
I
still doing the grunt work, or are you
well,
kind of directing almost?
I think I'm getting closer to that kind of director. Like there's days where I do grunt work. Like it's part of being in that shop. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you have to help with like bullshit jobs or like jobs you don't
Well,
really
there's always
want to
going to
do.
be stuff that needs to
There's
get
always
done, and
stuff.
you
We
just need
always have
somebody.
decommissioning. Like got to take stuff apart. It's just like I'm usually last on the roster for that stuff, and that's because of how much of the fiber I do in that building. Is that like they'd rather put me on a job like that until it's like, oh, today's slow. Like, all right, go help these guys move these bins around or do that. Like, it does happen, just
Well, there's always
not
gonna be a
as
down
often
day and
anymore.
stuff
Yeah,
like that too.
and that's kind of good because it's like a break. So it's like you'll see the guys that are complaining like, oh, like we're just doing all this manual labor. Like, oh, all we do is pull cable like all day.
Sometimes
and,
it's
like,
nice though. Like,
it's nice. It's like a nice break from dealing with fiber. And fiber also is very delicate. So like you have to work, like as they say, with glass fingers. Like you've got to kind of treat
well,
it
I mean,
very
that's what it
delicately.
is, right? Fiber is just like a
It's
tube of glass.
Yeah. So you have to deal delicately, even if you're pulling fiber cable, which is actually armored. I mean, you can get a lot of different setups. You can have actual like the BX armor that like electrical wire comes in, but in there's always like Kevlar. The thing's protected, but you can still break it. So like when I do a job that's not so like delicate, it's like, oh, all right, I don't have to like
you're like
worry
relaxed
about, like,
a little
breaking
bit,
something.
right?
But yeah, I think I've kind of moved out of that. I definitely moved out of that, like being like a junior tech in a way. Yeah.
And honestly, like going back to what you said before, like building the studio for Fallon, like that's gotta
cool.
be very.
It was cool.
Like especially because that's used like every day,
pretty much.
basically?
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. And during the build, me and a couple of guys ran into him in the elevator. He was coming in. We're like, oh, one of the guys was like, oh, we're building your new studio, and he's like, oh, thank you. He was very nice. Yeah. So that was cool. But you get to see that. I done a lot of work on the Today Show there, like their studio.
Okay.
That's another one I spent a lot of time in. The news. That's where they just do news.
Just constantly updating the studios.
Yeah, they did. They did like a refresh last summer. They're changing the equipment room. They cut it down quite a bit. Like they still haven't done the construction, but they're trying to move systems to like an IP setup. So they're getting away from like the copper cabling, like this stuff. It's. I mean, I think like from the business standpoint, it's space. So they can really kind of fine tune it, make things a lot smaller because the way the equipment is now, it's like fiber just takes on so much more data.
Oh yeah.
And they can really eliminate a lot of rack space and turn that over to usable space for their studio or whatever they want to do with the building. It's just kind of like the natural way things are going.
And New York real estate,
It's yeah. So they're always kind of working on that. It's definitely a company that they want to always improve. So they're always trying to upgrade.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what about like other people who you work with in the union? Is this kind of what they wanted to do when they were coming out of school? Like how did they, like what were their plans? Because I feel like you can't go to school and be like, oh, I'm gonna, be a fiber.
That's a good question because I like to think of the shop I work in almost as like the land of misfit toys. And not to like down talk, because it is a good job. Like everyone does pretty well. Like I do enjoy my job, but a lot of the people I've met are very talented in like different fields or areas of their life, and they're just kind of like ended up there. It's almost like some of us joke it's like an area of wasted talent. Like some people.
Well, like so that's what I'm thinking too, right? It's like all these people had aspirations of other things, so
I guess just didn't pan out, or maybe like the money was good, so they stayed. Like it is a steady job. The nice thing too is like this work is everywhere. You're pretty much like when you're in this building, you're in the building. Like you're not working outside in a telephone pole, or you're
nice air conditioned.
Everything's air conditioned. Like you're coming to the same place. I mean, it can be like rugged, and you don't always have like your spot in the shop because there's so many people you work with, but you can kind of make a home out of it. And a lot of my coworkers who are more seasoned, they've worked all over the country. They've done like basketball stadiums, like football
Oh,
stadiums.
really? Okay.
Yeah, like there's people that have worked at like Madison Square Garden, like stuff
Oh,
like
where's
that.
the Ranger
Like
ticket hookup?
well, I mean, like they have, like I said, they have the integration. It's everywhere. People have gone out and built data centers. A lot of guys left actually for a while to work for MLB. Apparently
for
they
like their streaming service.
they were building like data centers for that. But I guess like they had
Cool.
yeah, they had like really good contracts. One of the guys I worked with was he was like managing jobs for them, and he was saying it paid like crazy money. It's just like being so far away. I think he had to go to the Midwest for a while. It's just
where
like
the data centers are. Where
it's
there's
like
a
you
lot
can
of
only do it
space.
for so long before you're like, all right, I'm out. So it's like you'll take a contract for like however many months the job should take. And those are hard too, because like even though in my shop we were daily hires, I think as we talked about in culture, everyone there knows each other. Like we're kind of at a point where it's like the same guys keep coming back.
Mhm.
So it's like you can trust the people you work with here. Where like when you're on a road job like that, it's like you're meeting newer people.
Yeah, you
and
don't
you're
know who to
also-
trust. And
Oh yeah, you're also
gotta
meeting
prove
guys
yourself
that
too.
like however they got in, like they knew a guy. Like that's what a lot of the industry is. It's like somebody knows somebody, so
Yeah.
they're here.
I mean, that's how you got in. Almost,
Yeah,
right?
and that's like most of the people I know. That's how they got in. Like no one went to school for system integration.
Yeah.
It's a weird field where like even
I mean, that's how a lot of fields are, though. It's
yeah,
just like you don't
there's no
think of it,
specific-
and then somebody's like, "Hey, do this thing."
yeah, you want to try this, or like maybe some guys have like backgrounds in like electrical work. Everyone kind of contributes something for sure that they each have their own expertise in. I don't think anyone set out like I'm gonna be a wireman, like I'm gonna do this. Like they kind of stumble upon it. And it's like you either like it or you don't like it. A lot of the job is what you make of it. Like there's good days, there's bad days. We have some of our employees that are like very disgruntled. They hate the place, and it's like why not just leave? But it's like, well, the money, like they're not gonna leave because they need a paycheck. And then other guys that
There's
actually
a lot
enjoy
worse
the
jobs
work.
out there. So
Yeah, plenty. But that's the thing is like you get comfortable. Again, like I said, like you're coming to a building, you're inside. When I moved to my apartment, the Verizon guy came over and I was talking to him a bit. He's like, yeah, I got to go like 2 streets over and climb a pole to patch your fiber in. I'm like, wow, that sucks. Like I didn't tell him what I do for a living, but I'm like, oh my God. Like,
yeah, thank God I don't do
the worst thing I'll have to do is take an elevator to another floor and like go into a data room, like boom.
Yeah, and then you're even complaining about that. You're like, oh, I gotta go.
Yeah, I gotta go
52.
upstairs. I gotta go upstairs. God. Yeah. So
That's funny.
yeah, it definitely could be worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like flipping it back onto you, maybe, like, this wasn't your kind of end goal.
Yeah.
Right? So what was your end goal?
Oof.
And kind of,
Yeah.
what are you thinking for next steps, I guess, in your career?
Yeah. So initially I was going to college for what they called new media. And it was kind of like programming. Kind of like what you guys talk about on Story Points. I was doing that like the JavaScript, like building websites and all that stuff. And I was trying to get into that. What's that?
And you said, screw this, I'm out.
No. Well, I was more interested in the Photoshop, like the kind of graphic design element of it.
Yep.
In the program I was in, I didn't pass. It was like a mid kind of term project you had to do to get to the next level of new media.
Okay.
So,
as part of the program?
Yeah. So I submitted my portfolio basically.
Okay.
And I think I failed it by like a couple points. And they were like, oh, like,
it's the worst.
Sorry, but like you have to wait a year to do this. I'm like, I can't do it next semester. Like, no, because we only offer it in the fall. I was like, wow. So they're like, you can switch into communications and like transfer credits and still graduate like within the next year. So I think at that time it was like a year and a half I had left.
Okay.
I would have added like 2 more years or so. So I did that. I started going to these communication, like it was kind of like a lot of the similar classes, but it turned into more of like a BS, like, it wasn't as intense with any of that. But I was kind of like around that time I started working at this job. So I was just like, well, this is like the most intriguing thing I'm doing. I'm learning stuff every day.
Yep.
I like working with my hands. I think that's also what kept me in this, is that like I really do enjoy that.
Yeah, I think
Knowing
you,
and
I
like
think
you know me,
for
like
sure.
I work on the cars and stuff. Like that was always a hobby for me. I just like doing things with my hands. I always had fun doing this job.
Exactly.
And actually, fun fact too, when I came back from that summer where I was just gonna work for the summer at NBC and go back to Apple.
Yep.
I actually came back to Apple for like 2 weeks, and I was like, "Ah, man, like that job was great. Like I really want to get back. Like I actually enjoyed going to work every day." So I called up the supervisor, and he's like, "Hey, I'll gladly take you back, but I need you here full time." And I was going back into school. Like I think I had like 2 classes that were like daytime.
Okay.
I literally dropped them and
Really?
went all night classes. Yeah. So
okay, you did night.
yeah,
classes,
so I went to work and then went to school after.
That's got to be rough.
It sucked. Yeah, it sucked. But I feel like back then I had a lot more energy than now. Like I couldn't imagine
Back
like
in the old days.
back in my 20s. But yeah, now I feel like that'd be kind of hard.
When I was your age.
And like what I'll do now is it's more intense. Like I'm dealing more with like their on-air systems now too. Like back then it was still like I was learning. I was doing like little jobs here and there. I was never really in charge of anything. So like nothing really ever rested on my shoulder.
Well, it wasn't as intense. Like you didn't have as much responsibility.
Yeah, I didn't have as much responsibility. But yeah, so I mean, I did end up graduating, but yeah, that's kind of what kept me in that field. So I didn't initially seek it out. It kind of like fell into my lap almost, and I just kind of ran with it.
Yeah,
and I don't regret it. Like
no, for sure. Like that's most people's careers. I feel like they fall into something that they didn't expect.
It's like something happens and then you kind of try and make the best of it. And
I mean, that's one of the things too, right? Like everybody says you never, like whatever you go to school for is never what you end up doing kind of
I don't really know many people that do what they went to school for.
Yeah.
I mean, the exception of you guys. I mean, but that's, you know, and maybe it's not the exact same thing that you went to school for. You can feel the change.
I'm just a nurse.
Yeah, as far as the future, I think the thing is I do really enjoy doing fiber optics. And there's days where it's like, wow, this like sucks what I'm doing, but it's like it's project depending. Like if I get a good project, it's a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah.
So for the future, maybe it's like I can kind of try and segue into like an engineering type kind of like what my father does, like system
designing the studio,
which like now I kind of have seen how it gets built. Like maybe if I get trained to like how to actually create that.
Well, also like once you're kind of on the floor and you're building stuff, you have that in your mind, right?
Yeah.
For like, hey, these are the things that are going to be a problem while you're designing it.
Yeah. So and that happens a lot. Like we run into issues that the engineers, like they're not physically doing the work, so they don't really know. Like to them, it looks good on paper, but it's like you try and do it, and you're like, oh, well, this happened.
But once you're down into the
and now it's like I've seen a lot of the problems. It's like I might have a better insight of like what to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like you would have a good advantage.
Yeah,
if you were designing, like with that experience. So,
and that's kind of been a discussion like in our shop. Like a lot of the guys are like, wow, if they like kind of gave us chances to elevate, like we've seen it from this level that a lot of them haven't, and they've brought people like out of college that they're doing good, but like it's like a rough transition for them because they're also thrust into engineering, a field that you can't study for.
Yeah. I mean, it's all experiential, right?
Yeah, it is. Like, and even like in the case with my dad, like he's had an electrical background.
Yeah.
And Air Force, he worked on communication systems, but there was no school for what he did. Like he kind of, again, like he knew someone. They were like, hey, come on board and like you start working as engineering here, and like you start with little projects, and he's just learned it. So there's no real school. Like no one in that business went to school for this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you can't learn that.
It's
you don't
weird,
know
like,
coming
industry.
out of school. You're like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing.
Yeah. It's definitely a weird industry. It's niche. I know there's a lot of like, not a lot. There's like a few companies that really do the integration like across the U.S. and like a lot of people are connected. So like sometimes when there's layoffs, guys will like call up someone and they'll go work for them for a few months or until they get back, like the call back. So
almost take like contract work.
Yeah. So a lot of that like goes on.
Do you have advice for people who kind of want to get into this field or any sort of recommendations around that? Yeah.
Yeah. I think as far as getting in, it's hard for me to answer that because I was one of those people that it kind of like just kind of came to me.
Right.
I think I'm sure it's maybe not hard to transition into this because actually, like, I have met people who were doing electrical work, like working as electricians, and like they kind of segued in. I think if you were working any type of trade work,
Yeah. I mean, that's what it seems like if you're in the kind
yeah,
of trade, if you're in the unions already, it's an easy transition.
yeah, that would probably give you a big lead on that, like on getting in. Just like working with your hands and learning trade, because we do a lot of jobs that are like on construction sites, so there's kind of that cross between like you see what someone else is doing, and like you'll talk to these people about what they do. So yeah, that's probably the best advice I could give.
Yeah,
and then if you get an opportunity to get in, just
exactly,
just work at it, give it your best shot. Use your brain.
Run with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, before we sort of wrap up here, I would say if you weren't, in this industry, what do you think that you would be doing?
What would I be? Yeah, I've thought about that before, and that's a really good question. I have really no idea. I feel like I probably would have found some way
running
back
a car
to
wash or something.
Nah, yeah, squeaks. Yeah, I might be running squeaks, or I don't know. I feel like I probably would have segued back to something with like the programming or graphic design. Like I think because I didn't necessarily at that time, I never thought I was going to give up on that.
Yeah.
So I probably would have just found
even
a
like
way to
back
stick
then,
with that.
it was like everything was sort of going towards
sitting
at a desk in front of a computer type deal.
Yeah, yeah. And I was still like doing that stuff actively. So it's like I never really thought I would switch. I think this opportunity kind of came up for me, and I was like, wow, I actually really enjoy this.
Yeah.
And then ran with it. And then when I started learning fiber, that's kind of when things take off. I mean, just to kind of briefly, I know we're kind of running on time, but I was put on a project. They were basically trying to redo the old infrastructure that went over to their Today Show and put in a fiber line.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that was like,
so like
my
side by
first...
side, set up the new stuff with the old stuff, or kind of just slow transition?
They had to like cut it over, kind of like slowly. They were like taking things down and running it on this new network. But it was a big job because they were actually carving part of the building out and reconstructing it. They wanted to build like, if you go into the building now, they have it's like the grand, I think they call it like the grand staircase. It's where they like load all their shows and tours when they still had tours like pre-COVID. They built this like whole thing in the mezzanine of the building, but they had to demolish what was there. And a lot of that was cabling that actually ran the control room and equipment room.
Like underneath the grand staircase?
Yeah, it went like through the center of the building down to the basement and then across. So in order to do this, they had to chop the cables that ran through this whole part of their building. Yeah. So
just cut the backbone.
To do that project, it was like I think they might have shut the studio down. I mean, this was going back years ago. So I think they probably aired it out of a different control room. And then
gotcha.
Like they'll have like times where they're just off and they'll do like cutovers. But yeah, so that was like my kind of introduction to it. And that's where I started working with it. And
just, threw you into the fire.
Threw me into the fire.
Yeah, no, we're gonna shut this down. We're gonna.
No, I mean that the guy that was leading the crew, he was like, he was very, very smart guy. He used to work in aerospace, and he was
okay.
He just took everything so seriously. Like he was probably one of the most.
Well,
intimidating.
I mean, honestly though, it's probably good because you need somebody who's like very on top of things.
The job we built is like probably one of the finest installations in that building. It's just like a lot of stuff. Since it's broadcast is first, like shows come first. It's like the work he did is the work you'd want to see like on an airplane or like at NASA. Like, oh wow, he took
pull
his
off
time.
a panel and you see everything. All the wiring is
everything was done to spec with this guy. But he was a very good mentor for me. And like kind of to touch on the show, like I think Roger pointed out, like sometimes the hard mentors are the best. I learned the most from him, and I hated him for a long time. I hated him.
But that's how you knew
he was so
doing
mean
a good
to me.
Job.
And then like somewhere along the line cracked, and he was like, he somehow like kind of had that respect, like, oh, he can learn, like he's doing a good job, and like our relationship changed at that point. But he did teach me a lot during that time period.
Yeah.
So
well, so like that's the great thing about. Oh, hello, Skylar. That's
Yeah.
the great thing about mentors, right? Is like you think they're hard asses, and then it clicks in your head, right?
Yeah,
and
like,
all of a sudden,
oh,
like
maybe this
you
is for
start,
a reason.
yeah, and then you start
Yeah.
thinking that way, and now you're eventually going to be a mentor for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because you're carrying on that kind of mentality.
And that kind of happens now. Like there's a couple people that we're trying to bring into doing some of the fiber work, and like I'll end up taking them with me and like showing them stuff that I know. So it's
Come
like
on, guys.
that's why when I was listening to your podcast, I was listening to it at work. I'm like, oh my god, I think this is like happening in my in my life right now.
Oh, that's how you know it's a
Yeah.
good episode.
Yeah,
Resonates. So.
definitely.
All right. Well, I think that's probably all we have for today.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, but thanks for being the first guest on,
Honored.
Our new series, How I Became, the impossible name to remember.
How I became.
But yeah, thanks for listening. Story Points Podcast. We're on all of the platforms. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
We're on all
podcasts.
of them. Any platform you
Catch
can
us on
imagine.
YouTube. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. That's what Roger does. All that fun stuff.
Yeah, all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Stay tuned for
Thank
the
you,
next
guys.
episode. We'll have I don't know who our next guest is going to be, but it'll be good. So